He found a girl alone in the desert and rode back with a ring saying, "You ain't alone no more." The wind moaned across the Mojave Flats, pushing waves of pale dust under a sky the color of old pewter. The sun was dying behind the red hills, and the air shimmered with heat that had nowhere left to go. Boone Avery rode slowly, his horse's flanks crusted white with salt and sand. He'd been out prospecting for 2 weeks and hadn't struck anything worth spitting on. His canteen was half empty, and he'd given up whistling to keep his spirits. Only the crunch of hooves and the steady breathing of the horse kept him company. Then he saw her. At first he thought it was a trick of the heat, just another mirage born out of thirst and sky. But as he rode closer, the shape didn't melt away. A body lay half buried in sand near a broken wagon wheel, the skirt torn, the hands blistered and cracked. Boone stopped. The silence was heavy, as if the desert was holding its breath. He slid down and crouched beside her. The woman was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, her lips split from the sun. Her eyes fluttered open when his shadow fell over her face. "Ma'am?" Boone's voice came low, careful. "Can you hear me?" She blinked, trying to speak, but only dust came from her throat. Boone uncorked his canteen and tipped it gently to her lips. She drank with small, desperate gasps. "Easy," he murmured. "Don't take too much at once." She swallowed, then whispered something he couldn't quite catch. "What's that?" "Gone," she rasped. "All gone." Boone looked around. The shattered wagon, the scorched tracks, the wide sweep of emptiness. No horses, no smoke. Just wind. He nodded once, slowly. "All right, let's get you out of here." He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was light as a sack of grain, limp with exhaustion. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel the tremor in her breathing. As he tied her onto the saddle and led the horse by the reins, the sun dropped lower, bleeding orange through the dust. The desert stretched ahead like an endless graveyard of stone and heat. They moved through twilight, the light turning blue, then black. Coyotes howled in the distance. Boone didn't look back. He just kept walking toward the faint glimmer of the town's lanterns miles ahead. When they reached Dustwater, most of the town was already shut tight for the night. Only the saloon still spilled its yellow glow into the street. Boone stopped outside the doctor's small house and pounded on the door. Doc Kramer appeared, half asleep, with a lamp in hand.
"What in hell, Boone?"
"You bringing me another corpse?" "She's alive," Boone said. "Barely." The doctor grumbled but stepped aside. Boone carried her in and laid her on the cot. The lamplight showed her face, sunburnt, dirt-streaked, yet strangely peaceful now that she was breathing steady. Around her neck hung a small brass locket, blackened from heat but still whole. "Who is she?" Kramer asked. "Didn't say," Boone replied. "Didn't have the strength to." Kramer sniffed, already cleaning her wounds. "Best keep quiet about this. Folks don't like strangers crawling in from the desert, not after what happened with them Pritchard wagons last spring." Boone's jaw tightened. "She's no trouble. Just needs rest." The doctor gave him a long look. "Maybe, but you'll see how quick Dustwater talks when something strange blows in with the wind." Boone said nothing. He just turned toward the door, watching the lamplight flicker against the woman's face. For a moment, the gold edge of the locket caught the light, throwing a faint shimmer onto the wall. Outside, the wind had shifted. The night carried the smell of rain, rare, uncertain, like a promise the desert wasn't sure it wanted to keep. Boone stepped out into the dark, pulling his hat low. The door closed softly behind him, and the lamplight died to a thin line under the sill. Morning came slowly to Dustwater. Pale light slipped between the warped boards of the saloon, catching on bottles and dust motes. The town woke in fragments, boots on the boardwalk, a cough from behind a curtain, the first clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Boone Avery sat outside the doctor's place, hat pulled low, a tin cup of coffee cooling in his hands. His horse grazed lazily beside the hitch rail. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl lying in that sand, her cracked lips whispering, "All gone." The door creaked behind him. Doc Kramer stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "She'll live," he said. "Weak as a newborn calf, but she's breathing steady. Woke for a bit, too." Boone straightened. "She says her name?" "Lydia Hart," Kramer said. "From a wagon train bound for California. Said her folks were part of it." He squinted toward the horizon. "You heard about that wreck out by Red Hollow? Bandits hit it, maybe. Or maybe the desert did the job for 'em." Boone nodded grimly. He had passed the charred remnants of wagons before, sometimes raided, burned from the heat. The desert didn't much care how a man met his end. "She's asking for you," the doctor added. Boone hesitated, then pushed open the door. Inside, the room smelled of alcohol and bandages. Lydia sat upright against a pillow, her skin pale but her eyes clearer now, gray-blue like rain over stone. She looked at him quietly as he stepped in. "You're Boone," she said, her voice hoarse. "Yes, ma'am." "You found me." He nodded once. "Couldn't leave you there." For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the shelf. Finally Lydia looked down at her hands, which were wrapped in clean linen. "They said everyone was dead," she murmured. "My father, the others. I ran when the shooting started. I didn't look back." Boone's eyes softened. "You did what you had to." Her fingers touched the blackened locket at her throat. "This was his," he said. "If anything ever happened, I'd know what to do with it. But I don't." Boone didn't ask. He just said, "Rest easy. You're safe now." She smiled faintly, a tremor in her lips. "You don't know this town, do you?" Boone raised an eyebrow. "They don't like outsiders," she said quietly. "They'll smile at you, but behind it, they're counting reasons to send you packing." He gave a small shrug. "Wouldn't be the first time folks whispered behind my back." Before Lydia could answer, the door opened again. A shadow filled the frame, a tall man with a badge glinting on his vest. Deputy Merritt Cole stepped in, all dust and iron. His boots clicked on the floorboards. "Morning, Doc," he said, voice smooth as oil. Then his gaze landed on Lydia. "Well, I'll be damned." The lost girl from the hollow. Boone stood. "You know her?" "Only by rumor," Merritt said, eyes sharp. "We sent men out to find survivors. Found plenty of bones, but no one was breathing. Looks like she's got 9 lives." Lydia's hands tightened on the blanket. "I don't know you." "You don't have to," Merritt replied. "But you showing up now is bound to stir folks up. Men died trying to track your wagon. Ain't right to come walking in while widows are still weeping." Boone's tone hardened. "She doesn't owe you explanations." Merritt smiled thinly. "Maybe not me, but Dustwater's small. People'll talk. They always do." He tipped his hat to Lydia and turned to leave. "Take care, miss. You too, Avery." When the door shut, the silence came heavy again. Lydia looked toward Boone, fear flickering behind her eyes. "He thinks I brought death with me," she whispered. Boone didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, the way she sat small under the lamplight, holding onto that scorched locket like it was the only thing keeping her in one piece. Outside, wind pushed through the street, rattling a loose sign. Boone walked to the window and stared out at the bright, empty morning. "Let 'em talk," he said finally. "I've heard worse lies than theirs." But even as he said it, something in his gut told him the deputy wasn't finished, and neither was whatever trouble had followed Lydia Hart out of the desert. By the next afternoon, the whole town knew Boone Avery had dragged a half-dead woman out of the desert. Dustwater had a way of spreading news faster than a prairie fire. At the general store, old Mrs. Keene whispered, said she was the only one left from that wagon train. At the saloon, a ranch hand muttered, 2 fellas went out looking for survivors, never came back. Maybe she's why. By sundown, Lydia Hart's name was spoken like a curse wrapped in pity. Boone ignored it. He spent the morning fixing the latch on his cabin door outside town, thinking Lydia would need a quiet place to rest once she could ride. He wasn't much for company, but something about leaving her with gossiping townsfolk didn't sit right. That evening, he stopped by the doctor's again. Lydia was sitting by the window wearing a clean dress Kramer's wife had lent her. The color had returned to her cheeks, though her eyes still carried the desert's emptiness. "You shouldn't have done all this," she said as Boone stepped in. "Just patchwork," he replied. "Needed something to keep my hands busy." She looked down at her locket. "Folks are saying things. That I bring bad luck, that men die around me." Boone leaned against the doorframe. "You believe that?" Her silence was answer enough. "People'll always find something to whisper about," he said. "Easier than facing their own ghosts." Lydia's eyes flicked up to him. "You've got ghosts too?" Boone gave a faint, tired smile. "Enough to fill a graveyard." A small knock broke the moment. Doc Kramer entered, holding his hat. "Boone," he said quietly, "you heard what happened?" Boone frowned. "What now?" "Cal Wilkins, the rancher who helped you fetch her things from the desert. They found him this morning, dead in his barn." Lydia froze. "Dead how?" "Fell on his own pitchfork, they say," Kramer muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. "But that ain't all. 2 men claim they saw something out near the ridge last night. A shadow walking through the sand. No footprints after." Boone's jaw tightened. "You believe that?" "I believe Cal's dead and folks are looking for someone to blame," the doctor said. His eyes flicked to Lydia. Lydia's voice trembled. "They think I had something to do with it," Kramer sighed. "They don't need proof, Miss Hart. Fear's enough." Boone's hand clenched around his hat brim. "I'll talk to Merritt. See if he knows anything." But Lydia reached for his arm. "Don't, he wants to scare me." "To scare you?" Her touch was soft but desperate, and Boone felt something twist in his chest. Something he hadn't let himself think in a long time. He nodded slowly. "All right. I'll stay close." That night Boone walked her back to the boarding house. The street was nearly empty. Lamps flickered low, throwing long shadows on the dust. Somewhere, a dog barked and went quiet. "Thank you," Lydia said softly as they reached the steps. "For believing me." Boone tipped his hat. "Ain't believe. Just sense. Evil doesn't ride with folks, it rides in 'em." Lydia gave a faint, tired smile, then turned toward the door. The wind rose suddenly, lifting her hair and scattering dust across the steps. Boone watched until she disappeared inside. He was halfway back to his horse when he saw movement near the edge of the alley. Someone watching him. The figure shifted, then melted into the shadows before Boone could make out a face. He stood there a long moment, the wind whispering through the street. Then he climbed onto his horse and rode toward the outskirts of town, the uneasy feeling in his gut growing heavier with each hoofbeat. Behind him, the light in Lydia's room went dark, and by morning, another man would be found dead, one of the riders who'd gone, searching for the wreck. The whispers would grow louder, and Boone Avery would find himself standing between a frightened woman and a town ready to hang her name to every shadow that moved. The next dawn broke cold and gray. A thin fog rolled down from the hills, curling between the buildings like smoke. Dustwater's streets were nearly silent, except for the sound of boots gathering near the sheriff's office. Boone arrived just as 2 men carried a body wrapped in canvas. One end of the cloth had come loose, showing a pale, stiff hand. "Who is it?" Boone asked. Sheriff Dugan, a thick man with a gray mustache and a worn badge, looked up. "Eli Morton," he said. "One of the fellows who went searching that wreckage." Boone frowned. "What happened?" "Shot in the back," Dugan said, his voice low. "No horse, no trail worth following. Whoever did it knew how to cover their tracks." From the crowd, a voice said sharply, "Maybe it's that girl, the desert one." Boone turned toward the speaker, a wiry ranch hand with a face sunburnt to leather. "You best keep her name out of your mouth," Boone said quietly. The man scoffed. "You're defending her? 2 men have died since she came here, Avery. You can't call that a coincidence." Before Boone could answer, the saloon door banged open. Deputy Merritt Cole stepped out, badge gleaming, hands resting easy on his gun belt. "All right, that's enough jawing," he said. "We'll figure this out properly." Boone oversaw him. There was something in Merritt's eyes, a flicker of interest too calm for a man who'd just seen another body. You got any leads? Boone asked. Merritt smiled thinly. Might have. Depends on what the lady's been hiding. Boone's tone turned cold. You talk like you already know she's guilty. Merritt tilted his head. Just saying, trouble has a habit of following folks who lie about where they come from. Boone stepped closer, voice low. She told the truth. You're just too eager to see ghosts. The deputy chuckled, leaning in. You care a lot for a woman you barely know. Boone's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Later that morning, Heva sighted Lydia. She was sitting by the window of the boarding house, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. The town outside was quieter than usual, people moving in clusters, whispering as they passed. She looked up when Boone entered. Someone else is dead, isn't there? Boone nodded. Eli Morton shot. Her face went pale. They'll blame me again. They already are, Boone said. He sat across from her, voice steady. I won't let them. Her eyes filled with tears and she tried to hide. Why are you doing this for me? Boone took a breath. The question hit deeper than he expected. Maybe because I know what it's like to be left for dead. Maybe because no one else will. For the first time since he'd met her, Lydia smiled faintly. You don't know what that means to me. He gave a small nod, then glanced at the locket resting against her chest. That trinket, your father's, why keep it so close? She hesitated, then unclasped it. Inside was a small scrap of paper burned around the edges, covered in faded pencil lines, part of a hand-drawn map. My father said this led to something he found before he died, she whispered. A gold vein somewhere near Red Hollow. He told me to protect it, but people killed for it. Boone studied the paper. Does anyone else know? Only the deputy, she said quietly. He worked for my father once. Before the attack. Boone's stomach turned cold. Merritt Cole? She nodded. He wanted the map. Father refused. That night the wagons burned. Boone folded the paper and slipped it back into the locket. Then this ain't bad luck. It's greed. Lydia's hands trembled. He'll come for me. He already knows I'm alive. Boone rose, pulling his hat down low. Then he'll have to go through me first. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the desert, a storm building somewhere far off. Boone stepped into the street as the wind began to rise again, carrying dust that scraped his skin like grit and glass. For the first time in years, he felt purpose stirring inside him. Not for gold, not for redemption, but for the woman whose eyes had carried the same kind of loneliness he'd worn for half his life. Somewhere behind him, Lydia closed the curtains, and in the shadows across the street, Merritt Cole watched Boone ride away. His hand rested on the butt of his gun, and a thin smile crossed his face. By the time Boone reached his cabin that night, the storm had started to build. The sky was thick and restless, flashing white every few minutes. The smell of rain rode the wind, sharp and electric. He led his horse under the small lean-to beside the cabin, then stood on the porch, listening. The desert was alive in a strange way, thunder rolling far off, coyotes crying somewhere beyond the ridgeline. Inside, he lit the lamp and sat at the table. The locket's image stayed in his mind, the burned map, the gold claim, Lydia's trembling hands. Boone had chased gold before. It always led to pain, but this was different. This time it wasn't greed driving him. It was the need to protect her from a man who'd already killed for it. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and stared into it until the rain finally came. The first drops hit the roof like pebbles and the air filled with the scent of wet dust. There was a knock at the door. Boone stood quickly, his hand going to the revolver at his belt. Who's there? It's me, came Lydia's voice, soft but urgent. He opened the door, surprised. She was soaked from the storm, her shawl clinging to her shoulders. Lydia, what are you doing here? I couldn't stay, she said. Someone tried to get into my room. I heard the lock turn. Boone's face hardened. Did you see who? She shook her head. No, but I ran. I thought maybe you did right, Boone said. Stepping aside to let her in, she crossed the threshold slowly. eyes darting around the small cabin, the single bed, the cold stove, the few tools hanging by the wall. "You live alone," she said quietly. "Always have." He took her wet shawl and hung it near the fire. "You can rest here tonight. I'll keep watch." For a while neither spoke. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm. Lydia sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her hands trembled not from cold but from the weight of everything she'd carried since that massacre. Boone poured her some coffee. "Ain't much, but it's hot." She took it, fingers brushing his. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, voice small. "You don't owe me anything." Boone leaned back in his chair. "Maybe I'm tired of walking away from the right thing." Lydia looked up at him, eyes soft in the firelight. "You ever lose someone?" He hesitated. "My brother. Years back. Gold fever took him. Went chasing a vein through the mountains and never came out." She nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. "I lost my father to it too," she whispered. "He said gold could save us, but it only destroyed everything." Boone's voice was quiet. "Maybe it still can, if it's worth dying to keep out of the wrong hands." Lightning flashed outside, lighting the cabin for a heartbeat. In that moment, Boone saw the outline of a figure through the window. He moved fast. "Get down," he hissed. A bullet shattered the glass, spraying splinters across the floor. Lydia screamed and ducked behind the table. Boone threw himself to the side, pulling his revolver. Another shot tore through the door. Boone fired back into the night, aiming where the flash had come from. The storm drowned the echoes. Then silence. He waited, breathing hard, gun ready. Only the rain answered. Lydia crawled toward him, eyes wide. "Who was it?" "Don't know," Boone said, checking the window. "But I got my guess. Merritt?" she whispered. Boone nodded grimly. "Or one of his hired guns. Either way, he knows you're here." Lydia's face was pale in the flickering light. "He won't stop." "No," Boone said quietly. "He won't." Outside, thunder cracked again, closer this time. The sound rolled over the plains like an omen. Boone holstered his revolver and looked out into the rain, his mind already turning. Tomorrow he'd have to end this. For her. For the truth. And for the part of himself that still believed a man could make something right before the end. Then the storm passed before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and still. Mud clung to Boone's boots as he stepped outside, scanning the horizon. The clouds had broken apart into long strips of silver, and the desert stretched quietly beneath them. Inside, Lydia was still asleep on the cot near the fire, her face turned toward the soft morning light. Boone watched her for a moment. There was something peaceful in the way she rested, though he knew peace wouldn't last. He saddled his horse and checked the ground around the cabin. Sure enough, fresh hoofprints marked the wet earth. One rider, heavy boots, coming close during the night, then pulling away after Boone's gunfire. The tracks led toward town. "Merritt," Boone muttered. When Lydia woke, he was already boiling water for coffee. She looked at him with worry. "You're going after him, aren't you?" Boone poured a cup and handed it to her. "I just want to talk." "That man doesn't talk," she said, shaking her head. "He threatens, then he kills." Boone gave a faint smile. "Then I'll make sure he doesn't do either again." She rose quickly, stepping toward him. "You'll get yourself killed." "Maybe," he said quietly. "But I've been half dead for years anyway." She looked at him then, not like a stranger, but like someone seeing another soul carrying the same kind of hurt. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. Boone adjusted his hat and gave her a steady look. "Stay here. Lock the door. If I'm not back by sundown, take my horse and ride east. There's a way station 15 miles out." She wanted to argue, but his tone left no room. "Boone," she began, voice trembling. He paused by the door, eyes softening. "You'll be safe, Lydia. That's what matters." Then he stepped out into the bright, cold morning. By the time Boone reached Dustwater, the town was already stirring. People stopped talking when he passed. Whispers followed him like the wind through dry grass. He went straight to the sheriff's office. Merritt Cole was there, sitting behind the desk like he owned the place. His boots were up, badge shining, a cigarette burning slow between his fingers. "Morning, Avery," he drawled. "Heard you had some trouble out at your cabin." Boone's voice was flat. "You know who fired those shots?" Merritt gave a mock frown. "Now why would you think that?" "Because you're the only one with reason to keep her scared." Merritt leaned forward, cigarette hanging from his lips. "That girl's dangerous. You think she stumbled out of the desert by chance? No, she's carrying something. I just want what's mine." Boone's hand rested on his belt. "You mean the gold claim her father died for?" Merritt's eyes narrowed. "So she told you?" "She told me enough." The deputy stood slowly, brushing ash from his coat. "Let's get one thing straight, Avery. That gold's worth more than you'll ever see in 10 lifetimes. And I ain't letting some broken prospector or his desert stray stand in my way." Boone stepped closer, the room thick with silence. "You killed her father. And the men who helped me. You think that map's cursed? No, it's just your kind of greed that makes graves." Merritt smiled without warmth. "Careful now. That sounds like a confession waiting to happen." "Then why don't you arrest me?" Boone asked. Merritt flicked the cigarette into the spittoon and drew his revolver faster than a blink. "Because I don't need to." Boone's gun was out just as quickly. 2 men, 2 barrels, only a breath between them. Outside, townsfolk froze as a single gunshot shattered the quiet. When the smoke cleared, Merritt was still standing, his gun aimed steady, but the floor between them held a hole where Boone's bullet had hit first, close enough to warn but not to kill. Boone's voice was cold. "Next time you come after her, I won't miss," Merritt sneered. "You just made yourself an outlaw, Avery." Boone turned, holstering his weapon. "Wouldn't be the first time." As he stepped into the sunlight, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some looked at him with fear, others with quiet respect, but Boone didn't see any of them. His mind was already on Lydia, alone in that cabin, waiting. The storm clouds gone, but danger still near. He climbed onto his horse and rode hard out of town, dust rising behind him like smoke from a gunfight not yet finished. The sun was high by the time Boone reached the cabin again. The storm had left the air clean, sharp with the smell of wet sagebrush. He could see his roof from the hilltop and his stomach tightened. The door was open. Boone spurred his horse forward. The boards creaked under his boots as he jumped off and pushed inside. "Lydia?" The room was empty. The fire was cold. Her shawl still hung on the chair, but the locket was gone from the table. Boone's chest went heavy. On the floor lay a single footprint, muddy, smaller than his, and beside it another set, heavier, fresh. He knelt, touching the print. A man's boot. Merritt's if he had to bet. Boone's jaw clenched. He turned toward the open door and scanned the horizon. Tracks led east toward the ridges near Red Hollow, the same direction the old wagon train had died. He mounted up and followed. The trail was rough, twisting through dry brush and sandstone. Buzzards circled high above. After an hour's ride, Boone saw a glint of movement in the distance, 2 horses climbing toward the ravine. Merritt rode ahead and Lydia was tied to the second horse, hands bound, her dress torn by the ride. Boone's blood went hot. He pushed his horse faster, keeping low, using the rocks for cover. When they stopped at the mouth of a cave, Merritt pulled her down roughly. Boone could hear their voices through the wind. "Where's the rest of the map?" Merritt barked. "There is no rest," Lydia cried. "It burned." "Don't lie to me, girl. Your father was a fool, but he wasn't stupid enough to leave a fortune half-marked." Boone moved closer, pistol drawn. Lydia's voice was shaking. "You killed him. You and those men that night." Merritt laughed low. He wouldn't share. "So I took what I could. Turns out he'd hidden the claim near here. I just need you to tell me where." Boone stepped out from behind the rocks. "She ain't telling you a thing." Merritt spun, drawing his gun. "You again?" Boone fired first. The shot ripped through Merritt's sleeve, grazing his arm. The deputy cursed and dove behind a boulder, returning fire. The desert echoed with the clash, thunder without rain. Lydia dropped to the ground trying to crawl behind a rock. Boone moved to cover her, bullets kicking dust around his boots. "Boone," she shouted. "The cave, there's another way out behind the rocks." "Go," he yelled back. "Now," she hesitated, eyes wide with fear. "Not without you." Boone ducked as another bullet tore past. "Move," he barked. She ran, disappearing into the cave's shadow. Boone shifted position, aiming toward where Merritt had been. Silence for a moment, then a low laugh came from the rocks. "You think you're a hero, Avery?" Merritt called. "You're just a man chasing ghosts." "Maybe," Boone said. "But at least mine don't shoot women." He stepped out, firing again. The bullet hit the stone near Merritt's head, shattering it. Merritt cursed, stumbled, then vanished deeper into the rocks. Boone followed cautiously. His boots scraped against loose gravel. The smell of gunpowder thick in the air. When he reached the cave mouth, he found Lydia waiting, clutching a lantern she'd lit from the fire pit. Her face was pale but steady. He went deeper, she whispered. Boone nodded. "Stay behind me." They moved into the dark. The cave was narrow and cool, echoing every step. Somewhere ahead, water dripped steadily. Boone held his revolver ready, eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then he saw it, a faint glow bouncing off the walls. A small chamber opened before them, and the ground sparkled faintly under the lantern light. Gold. Veins of it streaked through the stone like frozen fire. Lydia gasped. "This is it. My father's claim." Boone didn't answer. He could feel Merritt's presence before he saw him. A voice came from the shadows. "Told you she knew." Merritt stepped out. Blood on his sleeve, gun aimed straight at Boone's chest. Boone didn't flinch. "Let her go, Cole." Merritt's grin widened. "Not a chance. The gold's mine. Always was." The lantern light flickered between them, golden shadow dancing across their faces. Boone took one slow breath, the air thick with dust and death waiting its turn. Lydia's hand trembled as she gripped the locket tight against her chest. "Boone," she whispered. He didn't look away from Merritt. "Stay behind me." And in the hollow silence of the cave, the next heartbeat would decide who walked out alive. The cave held its breath. Only the steady drip of water broke the silence. Boone stood a few paces from Merritt, his revolver raised, his eyes fixed and calm. Lydia stayed behind him, clutching the locket so tight her knuckles were white. Merritt grinned through the shadows. "You ain't fast enough, Avery. I've seen you draw. You hesitate when it counts." Boone's voice came quiet and steady. "Maybe, but I only shoot when I mean it." The deputy's finger twitched on the trigger. "You should have stayed out of this. I'd have let you keep your worthless little life." "You already took enough lives," Boone said. "Time you paid for it." Merritt laughed, a low, cruel sound that echoed off the walls. "You don't understand, do you? This gold changes everything. The world doesn't remember men who play it honest. It remembers men who take what they want." Boone shifted his weight. "Maybe that's why the world keeps breaking." The deputy's grin faded. His gun moved a hair's breadth higher. "Guess we'll let the gold decide who's right." The cave flashed white with the gunfire. 2 shots cracked almost at once. The sound bounced through the stone like thunder. Boone staggered back, pain searing across his side. Merritt dropped to one knee, clutching his shoulder, cursing through his teeth. Lydia screamed, "Boone!" He steadied himself against the rock, jaw tight, blood soaking through his shirt. But he didn't fall. He raised the revolver again. Merritt tried to lift his gun, but Boone fired first. The bullet struck true this time, clean through the chest. Merritt's gun clattered to the floor as he stumbled backward, hitting the wall. His eyes went wide with disbelief, then dull. He slid down slowly, leaving a smear of blood against the rock. The echo of the shot lingered long after he was gone. Lydia ran to Boone's side. "You're hurt," he grunted, pressing a hand against the wound. "Just a scrape." "It's not just a scrape," she said, voice trembling. She tore part of her dress and pressed it to his side. "You saved me again." Boone looked down at her. Hair tangled, cheeks streaked with dust and tears. and managed a faint, wry smile. Starting to think you're more trouble than gold's worth, she let out a shaky laugh through her tears. Then why'd you come? His voice softened. Because you shouldn't have to face this alone. For a moment, they both sat there, two broken souls under the mountain, surrounded by the glitter of gold that had brought only death. Lydia turned to look at it, her face full of sorrow. So this is what my father died for, Boone nodded. And what Merritt killed for. Some men see it as a promise, others a curse. She reached out, touching one of the golden veins with her fingertips. It doesn't feel like a blessing. It never does, Boone said quietly. He holstered his revolver with a slow breath. We'll leave it here. Let the desert keep what it wants. Lydia looked at him in disbelief. But this could make us rich. Boone's eyes met hers, steady, kind, worn. Rich doesn't mean saved. She understood then. She closed her hand around the locket and whispered, Then we'll bury it here with him. Boone helped her to her feet. Together they dragged Merritt's body deeper into the chamber and covered it with stones. The gold around him gleamed faintly in the lamplight, as if mocking the greed that had ended him. When they were done, Boone leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Lydia tied his bandage tighter, her hands gentle. Let's go, he said finally. Before the storm circles back, they walked out into the sunlight. The air outside was bright, clean, almost unreal after the darkness inside. Boone squinted at the horizon, then glanced back at the cave one last time. Let the desert keep its secrets, he murmured. Lydia slipped her hand into his. And what about ours? Boone gave a faint, tired smile. Ours can ride with us. The wind doesn't tell tales. They mounted up and began the long ride back toward Dustwater, the sky wide and blue above them. Boone's wound burned, but Lydia's arm around him kept him steady. Behind them, the entrance to the cave shimmered in the distance, bright gold glinting for a moment in the sun, then fading back to dust. By the time Boone and Lydia reached Dustwater, the sun was low and red. The town looked smaller somehow, quiet, almost ashamed of what it had become. People peeked out from doorways as the two riders came down the main street, Boone sitting straight despite the blood drying dark on his side. No one spoke. No one dared. They had seen the deputy ride out that morning and he hadn't returned. Now Boone's look told them all they needed to know. Boone stopped in front of the sheriff's office. He dismounted slowly, wincing, and tied his horse to the post. Lydia slid down after him, ready to catch his arm when his legs wobbled. He brushed her off gently. I'm fine, he said, though his face was pale. They stepped inside. The office was empty, Merritt's hat still hanging on the peg, his half-smoked cigar left cold in the tray. Boone stared at it for a long time, then took the star-shaped badge from the desk. He laid it down flat like a stone on a grave. This town's got enough ghosts, he said quietly. Lydia's eyes softened. You did what had to be done, Boone nodded. Maybe, but it doesn't bring back the men he killed. Outside, a few townsfolk had gathered. An old man spoke up, voice shaking. Was it true what he said? About the gold? Boone looked at them, faces filled with hunger and fear, the same look Merritt had worn. He took a slow breath. Gold's still out there, he said. But all it ever bought was graves. The crowd went still. He stepped past them, Lydia following close. At the edge of town, they stopped by the well where Boone had first brought her days ago. The same wind blew through, carrying dust and scraps of dry grass. She looked up at him. What now? Boone tilted his head toward the mountains. You got family anywhere? She shook her head. Not anymore. He studied her a moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a simple ring made from a bent nail. The kind prospector might shape by a campfire when the nights got too long. He turned it in his fingers. My pa made this for my ma when they were dirt poor and had nothing but each other. Been carrying it since he passed. Guess I figured I'd know when it was time to let it go. Her breath caught. Boone. He took her hand, rough and trembling. "You ain't alone no more," he said softly. For a heartbeat, she couldn't speak. Then tears filled her eyes and she nodded. "Then neither are you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a little loose, but it caught the fading light just right, bright as gold without the curse. The crowd that had followed stood at a distance, silent. A woman wiped her eyes. A man took off his hat. No one said a word. Boone turned to them once more. "We'll be moving on. You folks got a choice to make. Keep chasing what's buried or start living again." Then he climbed onto his horse, reached down, and helped Lydia up behind him. She held on tight as they rode through town, past the saloon, the general store, and the half-built church where the bell had long gone quiet. The people watched until the two riders became shapes in the dust, heading toward the horizon. At the edge of town, Boone looked back once. The wind carried the smell of sage and rain. Lydia's head rested against his shoulder, her hair catching the light. "Feels lighter," she said softly. He nodded. "That's 'cause we left the weight where it belongs." The road ahead glowed in the sunset, wide and waiting. The desert that once meant death now looked almost gentle. Boone urged the horse forward, slow and steady, until the town disappeared behind them and only the wind kept pace. The last light spilled across the sand like gold. But this time, no one reached for it. Night came slowly across the desert, painting everything in shades of blue and silver. Boone and Lydia rode until the stars began to burn overhead, quiet and clear. The air was cool now, the kind that carried sound far, the whisper of hooves, the creak of leather, the soft rhythm of two hearts that had been broken and were learning to beat together again. They stopped near a dry riverbed where a few mesquite trees leaned toward the moonlight. Boone slid off the horse first, moving stiffly from his wound. Lydia followed and helped him sit. He gave her a small, tired smile. "You're getting good at patching me up." She smiled faintly back. "You're getting good at needing it." He chuckled low. The sound felt strange, almost forgotten. Fair point. They built a small fire, its light warm against the pale sand. Lydia handed him a piece of jerky and he took it with a nod. Neither said much. The silence between them felt comfortable now, not empty. After a while, Boone leaned back against a saddlebag and looked toward the stars. "You ever think about leaving all this behind? Starting somewhere no one knows your name?" She followed his gaze. "I used to think that's what I wanted. But now," she paused, choosing her words, "I think I just wanted someone who'd see me as more than a burden." Boone glanced at her. "You were never that," she smiled sadly. "Tell that to the folks who sold me off or the ones who called me cursed." His jaw tightened. "They don't get the last say. You hear me?" Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Then who does?" He reached out, took her hand. "You do." For a long moment the desert held still, just the crackle of fire and the soft rush of wind. Then Lydia whispered, "You could have left me in that sand. You didn't owe me a thing." Boone's voice came quiet but certain. "Didn't need a reason. Some things you just do 'cause it's right." She looked at him, her face soft with gratitude. "You saved my life." He shook his head. "No, you gave it back to me." The fire burned lower. The stars shimmered above them like 1,000 watchful eyes. Boone reached into his pocket and pulled out the scorched locket, the one she had carried from the wreck. "I fixed the hinge," he said, handing it to her. "Didn't want it to stay broken." She opened it carefully. Inside was the faded picture of her father, dust-stained but still there. She closed it again, pressing it to her chest. "Thank you." Boone stirred the embers with a stick. "Tomorrow we'll head north. There's a valley I used to know. Green in spring, quiet most of the year. Might be a good place to build something new." Lydia smiled. "A cabin, maybe?" He glanced at her, a hint of playfulness in his eyes. "If you're staying long enough to help raise it." "I'll stay," she said softly. "As long as you want me to." Boone met her gaze, the firelight catching in his tired eyes. Then that settled. They sat together until the flames dimmed to embers. The desert around them stretched endlessly and was calm. For the first time in years, Boone didn't feel lost in it. He looked out toward the horizon where the first faint line of dawn was forming. "World looks different when you ain't looking for gold," he said. Lydia leaned against his shoulder. "What are you looking for, then?" He thought for a moment. "Just peace. Maybe a little laughter," she smiled. "Then I reckon you'll find it." Boone looked down at her, the firelight fading on their faces. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Yeah," he murmured. "Maybe I already did." The wind picked up, gentle and steady, carrying the last smoke of the fire across the open land. When morning broke, they packed what little they had and rode toward the rising sun. The desert shimmered gold beneath the light, endless and alive. Boone glanced back once toward the past, toward the graves and ghosts left behind, then turned forward again. Lydia rested her hand on his arm. "Wherever this road goes," she said, "I'll ride beside you." Boone nodded. "And I'll keep my promise." He looked ahead, voice low and sure. "You ain't alone no more." They rode on together, two figures against the wide horizon, no longer running, but finally heading home. If this story touched your heart, don't ride off just yet. Hit that like button to help more folks find it, and subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and redemption under the western sky. There's a new story waiting on the next trail, and don't miss it.